Welcome to the AAEA special session, listening to the diverse voices of AAEA. This is not a typical presentation for equations or functions or evaluations, that sort of thing. We're here to invite you to join us for an enchanted evening with some of our top scholars in AAEA membership to share with you their journey, their story, their challenges, and their lessons to encourage everybody and support everybody in pursuing any professional field in AAEA. My name is Kathleen Liang. I work with the North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, and I will serve as your facilitator today. The session is recorded. After the session is over, we will share the recording, and I usually write a short blog to summarize the story key points with everybody on the AAEA website. We have 4 fantastic storytellers coming here to visit with you. Please type in the chat box about your questions to each presenter. If you have a particular question for a particular presenter, please identify the name. We will save all the questions and answers at the end of the storytelling. Each presenter has 8 minutes and no more than 8 minutes to share a summary of your story. And then all the details and all the information exchange will occur in a more time after each presenter's brief discussion. All right, I hope that's good with you. If you don't have any question, we will begin with my best friend, Don. Take it over from here, Don. And let me know when you're ready to switch the slide. I will switch the slide for you, okay?
Great, thanks. And that's the highlight of my day. I was just called someone's best friend. That doesn't happen much anymore. So thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, I'm Don Thilmany at Colorado State University, and obviously from all the emails you get from me, the president of the association right now. So thank you for letting me be here to tell my story. And some of this will actually, because I got the opportunity to do an address this summer, will complement some of the things I already brought up in that address. So first of all, let's look at the geography of Don Thilmany. The joke I always tell is that I have a latitude fixation and I've never moved very far from Interstate 80. I grew up on a farm in Marion, Iowa at 1745 Radio Road. Very typical Iowa farm, corn, soybeans, did 4-H, did FFA, all of the things a good farm kid did. And aligned with that, and because my dad was an Iowa State alumni, had one choice I was given of where I could go to school if I wanted my parents' help paying for it, and that was Iowa State. At that time, I had not discovered economics. I'd never had a course in it. And so I had to do a lot of discovery. So I actually was in a major called Public Service and Administration in Ag, which was a mix of econ, poli-sci, and sociology. I did a double major in international ag. I did a minor in Spanish, and I did emphasis in horticulture. All to say, I was interdisciplinary before I even knew what that word meant. And it was partly because I was super indecisive and just liked doing a lot of things. But of all the courses I took, I definitely fell in love with economics first and foremost. And actually, when I figured out I might want to go to grad school, they very much convinced me that I should pick a field and not do interdisciplinary because having depth in something would make a lot of sense. So I quickly converted myself to, as fast as I could, to being a little bit better trained in economics. And actually Lillian Fulginiti was there then and was my intermediate micro teacher. And I stay connected with her to this day, because when I told her I was going to Davis, she was fearful for me to learn fast and quickly. So I did go to UC Davis for grad school, intending to only get a master's. But they convinced me to stay for a PhD with a funding offer. And in fact, the job market at that time, which was the early 1990s, was not particularly great for economists. And Davis was great for me. And besides making me a better economist, I'd only seen Iowa agriculture. And boy, California agriculture was a change. I went from 5 major enterprises in ag to 94, I believe they do at the top 10 level. And so it was a really important part of my education for the breadth I need in the context of the industry. When I got done there, my first job was at Utah State University in a general economics program. It was merged there. I had the fortune of coming in with a class that included Chris Barrett, who to this day has stayed a very good mentor, even though he left for Cornell about the same time I left for CSU. And as many of you know, most of my career has been with CSU for the last 23, 24 years. So that's kind of my trajectory. And you see USDA over to the right because I've had a really fortuitous situation where twice I've gotten to do a sabbatical and play in government space a little bit. Next slide. That all said, then when I decided what I wanted to be as a professional, I'm not sure I ever actually asked for direct mentoring on this, but what I found myself wanting to do is really look for balance and partnerships. And so these bullets aren't as much to like show you my to-do list of what I've done in the almost 30 years now I've been in the profession, but just to show you what the nature of it has been. And I have very much enjoyed partnerships, both with government and some nonprofits, and still try to be a scholar as well. And most of my goals have been about being interdisciplinary, being relevant, and bringing graduate students and young scholars into the teams I work on. Next slide. In terms of extension, again, I did not start out as an extension faculty at either Utah State or Colorado State. Once I got tenure at Colorado State, they did ask me, because the field was requesting expertise like I had, if I would be willing to pivot into an extension role. And so I've had that role since 2000. And that has been good for me in the fact that sometimes this year being the exception, being at the computer all the time was not great for me. So it gave me a chance to be out in the field, to do some of my teaching, not just on campus in the classroom, but with industry groups. And so again, as I built a reputation and a set of partners, I've been able to actually go and do education, teaching, outreach, and co-creation with a lot of partners in the Colorado and national food systems. But I still also loved my teaching role too, with undergraduate and graduate education. But even my extension seeped in there, either through case studies or getting those students out in the field. And of course, I decided long ago to always have service as part of my portfolio as well, starting with some regional groups, and then of course, getting active with the AAEA. Next slide. So one thing I didn't do well in my career, but I've actually had partners, including Becca Jablonski, who's my colleague here at CSU now, convinced me one of the things I had not been doing well was getting the word out about what I was doing. And I would say our profession probably struggles with that on average. So one thing that has been a real focus of my career over more of the last decade is finding ways for our clientele to easily access the work that I do myself and with partnerships, including these two websites, one of which is CSU specific, and one which represents the broader community of practice of those of us who work on local food economics, and I have great teams. And so these are two websites where I feel represent really well that I wish it was my idea, but with the guidance from people who said they were having trouble finding my work or the work of people I work with, the new commitment I kind of made to making it easier for people to find the work that we as a profession do. And specifically, I have the best ability to obviously do that in the spaces that I work in. So that's one thing I would tell all of you, is that we sometimes as economists particularly hide our best and most fabulous work. And even though Choices does an amazing job, and these new webinar series and CFAIR are getting the word out, particularly this year, I still think there's a little work for all of us to do to make that even more available. Next slide. I know it's my last minute and Kathleen's gonna cut me off. So this is a picture I got to share in my presidential address, but I didn't get to spend nearly enough time with. You know, truly, my colleagues are the fabric of my life. And I have so many circles I run in. The top left corner is the great department I was lucky enough to be hired in. And one of the few benefits of being old is I've gotten to hire or be a part of the hiring decision for almost all of it now. And so I got to handpick this amazing team and get to work with them. I did work with regional groups early on. The one I feature in the top is the Food Distribution Research Society, and they and the Western Ag Econ Association, while I was still getting my feet under me and trying to become a full professional, gave me leadership opportunities that let me really grow. left-hand side, my grad students and continuing postdocs have been such an important part. They're like my academic children. I've learned so much about myself, actually learning how to mentor them and thinking and reflecting on what mentoring meant for me. That whole middle block is all the colleagues who've given me some sage piece of advice during my career. And then in that lower right-hand corner, the people who are my early mentors, both at UC Davis and beyond, so two of which we unfortunately lost this year for various reasons. So it was a bittersweet year. And then in the top right corner, and I'll wrap up then, my daughter Elizabeth, who continues to inspire me, my husband Matt, who shares my time with you all so unselfishly. And then you can barely see it, but my grandpa and dad on their tractor back in my farm in Iowa, who always reminded me to stay relevant and true and understand that the land grant mission is there for a reason. So with that, those are some of my story, and I look forward to hearing the rest of them today. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you, Don. That's so sweet. It's a fabulous 8 minutes. And I recognize on your photos that many of them, I think we all benefit from their advice and their guidance. I see Mary Ahern there. You see that a lot of people, I think we still remember vividly. Well, of course, they're still here with us. Sorry, Mary. All right. Next person is Rudy. Rudy, would you like to introduce yourself and then start your story? Just let me know. You want me to move the slide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Kathleen. Can you, next slide, please? Yeah. Next slide, thank you. So I came to the US as a grad student from the Philippines. And even though the Philippines was a US colony, so our educational system was very much American-based, it was still a tough adjustment period for me. Coming as a new graduate student, a new international student. My famous story that I normally tell my son is that I came to the US with a few $100s and just one suitcase. And I remember going first to Penn State because my cousin was there. And I took the bus from Penn State to Newark, Delaware, where the University of Delaware is located. And my suitcase got lost. Instead of going to Newark, Delaware, it went to Newark, New Jersey. So here I am, a new grad student, new international student with no suitcase, arriving in a really brand new place without anything. So that was tough. And I was very unsure of myself because I came here when I was 19 or 20 years old. So what I did was I really worked hard because I wasn't sure how I would measure up compared to other students in the US. So I went to Delaware for my master's, and then I went to Texas A&M for my PhD. Next slide, please. So I got my PhD in the early 90s, and as Don has mentioned, the job market was really tough at that time. But I was lucky enough to get hired by Massey University in New Zealand. So here's a couple of pictures for you. Beautiful place. I was there for about 15 months. I really enjoyed New Zealand and my colleagues there. But at that time, I felt a little bit isolated professionally. And you know, my wife is from New Jersey, so when an opening came up at Rutgers, it was an easy decision to apply and apply for that position. Next slide, please. So I had multiple stops. As I've said, my first job was in New Zealand, and then I moved to Rutgers University as an assistant professor. I was there for 4 years. Then I was hired by Texas A&M as an assistant professor as well. And I was at A&M for, I believe, 11 years before moving to University of Arkansas. So currently I'm at University of Arkansas. I want to tell you about my first conference presentation experience because it was nerve-wracking. I remember it perfectly and vividly. It was the Southern Ag Economics Association. I was a grad student, and so I was so nervous presenting my first paper. But what I remembered the most was how kind everybody was to me, and I think they realized it was my first conference presentation, so they all were really nice and very kind to me at that time. Another experience I want to share with you is my first journal rejection. And the reason why this was so painful was because the editor was my advisor during my master's program. And so anyway, so it was a painful experience, the first rejection. And I hope your first journal rejection won't be as painful, because I had very high hopes about it. Next slide, please. So let me just share with you my professional engagement. I did not really have a very robust network when I first started, as most probably do. So I pretty much work alone during my first 4 or 5 years in the profession. And so a lot of my papers then were just sole authored papers. But it's really started to pick up when I started, discussing topics with colleagues in the department and elsewhere. Then I met more people in conferences. So I think it's important to go to conferences and professional meetings to build your network. I also reach out to a number of people for advice and help. And I think this is just a natural thing. When people get to know you because of your work, then you get to interact more with other people in the profession. Next slide, please. So some of the important things I've learned through the years is that, as I've said, it's important to have a good network, having good people to work with. I was fortunate to have good mentors during my graduate student years. I'm also fortunate to have a good number of collaborators, past and present, a lot of students, and I tend to also get a lot of visiting scholars from all over the world. One thing I want to mention is about failures and rejections is you have to have a thick skin in our profession, right? It's part of academic life. And so there's no instant gratification. And I think that's part of managing expectations. And what I do is normally use that as a motivator. Next slide, please. Another thing I've learned is to be more forgiving of myself. I think we need to remember this, because we do get a lot of challenges as an academic. It's also important to give back in terms of mentoring and service. And I know this is a cliche, but I think learning really never ends, right? Most of the time, I feel like the more I learn, the more I know that I don't know much, right? So don't get intimidated to try learning new things, even though they seem too difficult. Next slide, please. Here's something that I found on Twitter, actually, a few days ago. And so it says here, open the too difficult box. Don't worry about capturing the gains from cooperation, because you will, right? The more you do things, the easier it will become, and so forth. So I think this is a good summary of what I just talked to you. Last slide, please. And so the last thing I want to mention to you is the importance of being a chronic finisher, right? And this is a picture, once again, that I got from Ariel from Twitter. So think about those revisions, right? I've supervised a number of graduate students and visiting scholars in the last 25 or so years. And one of the things that's really hard to impart to them is the importance of finishing things, right? So if I have one advice to junior people, it's to practice being a chronic finisher. Thank you, Kathleen. I think that's exactly 8 minutes, right?
Yes, boy, you guys are practicing. Thank you so much for being a great spirit. So we'll let people digest a little bit, but thank you so much, Rudy, for all the important lessons you shared. I'm sure we'll get quite a few questions If they don't ask questions, I got many questions for you. So there is Kim. Kim, are you ready?
I am. How are you? So, Rudy,
We're doing great. So
okay.
Go ahead.
Rudy, I want to thank you. I nodded my head so many times when I
Oh, thank you.
was sharing, and my original set of slides was a lot of what you had on yours, and then I decided to change them at the last minute. But wow, nice slides. Nice message. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. You all can look up my CV. It's there. Anyone can see it. So what I wanted to share is something a lot more personal because, you know, this process, the journey can be difficult at times. And so, you know, I'll just let you know what happened in my case. I made it, right? So how did I get here? I grew up in a very small town, and in my senior year of high school, my father passed away. I had no money of my own, and my surviving parent wasn't sure that a university education was the right thing for me at that time. So in swoops a magic aunt who said, "You will go to the University of Maine. You don't know what you want. You don't care about a career. Just go figure it out. It'll be good. It's not about the career. It's just do it." So I did it. And I got a bachelor's degree in zoology. But the most amazing thing was that it wasn't Turner, Maine. So many topics: fisheries management, philosophy, computer science, economics. I'd never seen a computer before. I loved computers. Theater, dance, no idea what I wanted to do. But during that time, I did work for a summer for two economists, Jim Wilson and Tom DeShano, to do primary data collection for fisheries processors along the Maine coast. And they tried to encourage me to switch my major to economics, but I didn't like it. I took a lot of courses, but I just couldn't see the connection. I wanted to feed the world, and I thought fish would do it. So I graduated and didn't know what to do. So in swoops the magic aunt who said, "Leave Maine, travel to the other side of the continent. Here's your graduation gift, a one-way train ticket to Vancouver, British Columbia on Canada's Via Rail. Just do it, don't think about it, go. Just figure it out, it'll be good." So the first message, we all need magic aunts who will tell us to move forward, figure it out, and it will be good. Next slide. In the next experiences, this is a little bit more, this is my favorite mentoring experience. I know the slide is a little bit small, but it's just keeping me on track. Here's the gist. I spent a year in the Pacific Northwest hanging out with all sorts of people. I learned a lot about life. And at the end of the year, I felt stuck. It was time to move on, but I had no idea. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So in swoops the magic aunt. Her message this time was, you need to make a decision. So something about this magic aunt. Aunt Sue is a Stanford PhD who studied decision theory with Jim March and worked with Herbert Simon. And you can look them up. They're very famous decision theorists. This mentoring has stayed with me throughout my life and the lives of many of the other academics that Sue mentored. Douglas College recently, which is within Rutgers, endowed a women's mentoring program in Sue Essler's name. So here's her mentoring advice. Own your decisions. First, I had a real difficult time here. I was stuck. I had no idea what to do, and I was sleeping on her couch. So she said, well, figure out what the problem is. You're asking me for answers. What is the problem? So define the problem as simply, clearly as possible, and it takes a lot of time. It's very hard. Second, what information do you need, including the criteria? Find that information as much as you can. Determine what information are facts, what information flows from processes that are unfolding. Go back to step one, further clarification of the problems. Consider all of the actions that you have ahead of you, all of the outcomes, write them all out, pros, cons of everything, spend a lot of time, be exhaustive. So I did all this and I still didn't have an answer. What am I gonna do next? So I asked her, I'm going to explain everything I've done. I did everything you told me to do, and I don't know what to do. And her answer was, oh, wait a minute. Now you know more than anybody else about your needs and your options, more than anyone. So just do it, figure it out, which is very frustrating. And so she said, just flip a coin. You've got all the information. It's time, flip a coin. Look at the result. In your gut, if it feels like crap, then you made the wrong decision. Think about it some more. If it feels good, just go with it, do it. I know it sounds crazy coming from a decision theorist, but it was the best advice I ever could have gotten. Sometimes the best decision is to wait, allow processes to work a bit. You can flip your coin again. The lesson, own your decisions. Other people will necessarily have put less time and effort into the process. They won't have a full set of knowledge. They won't know what's important to you. Learn how to hear advice that starts with, you should. Take the information out of it, but you have to know what your decisions are. You can go to the next slide. And so I went back. My decision was to go back to Maine. I had to take care of responsibilities. Then I took a job as a fisheries manager. I used my computer skills. I used my fisheries skills, but it was time to move on. A senior biologist said, wait a minute, do you really want to go on more in biology? Think about options. He didn't tell me what to do. He said, think about options. He felt that I needed, there was more information I could use. So he showed me economics, dynamic models of population growth, economics models, and told me to go talk to Rich Bishop at the university because I was in Madison. So I did. They had a job for a computer programmer at the time. I took the job, talked to Rich. While I was working, I had free tuition. I took courses in economics, math, stats, and I applied to their MS program. You can go to the next slide. And so at the end of my, partway through the master's, I didn't think I was ever going to know enough economics. What did I know? So I went on for the PhD. That was a very informed decision. There was one difficult road bump, an unplanned pregnancy with no partner. Did I receive advice? I received more advice at this point in my career than you could imagine. Was it requested or needed? Not really, because I owned my decisions. I had the information I needed. But my two immediate problems were how to work out my assistantship and whether to delay my field exam. I had the best mentor I could have had in Rich Bishop. I completed my PhD, wrote grant proposals, won one, went off to Costa Rica for a year with a toddler. Okay, next slide. At that point, at the end of that year, I went to the University of Guelph in Canada, had 2 more children before tenure. Did I get advice? Yep. Whoops, there's my timer. So I then went to the University of Nevada. I explored the decision was made to explore the continent. Our department was closed. It was awful. It was emotional. There was no decision to make. The best thing I could do is to accept that I could do nothing and to move on and leave it. I spent the rest of my time in Nevada trying to organize, maintain an unrecognized applied agricultural resource economics program with Tom Harris within a business school. And it was, we did a lot of good things, but I felt like at this point in my career, it was exhausting and I wasn't showing a strong outcome in progressing agricultural and applied economics at Nevada. So I moved to University of Connecticut, where my efforts I feel are having a lot more value. Words of wisdom, advice. I can't give you specific advice other than you need to know when you need to make a decision, own your decisions, and then just go and do it. Figure it out. It will be good. Think about the advice that you get. Does it fit? Is it the right time? And then my last bit is the collective decisions that we need to make as an organization, as the AAEA, is the severe problem of gender and racial bias. Check out the Monday New York Times. It's sad. So maybe we can use the same garbage pail approach to decision making, which is what they called this years ago, and figure out how to fix that. So thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Kim. I was not sure about your degree in decision theory, but then at the end of the story, I think you made the best decision. This
Well,
is a fantastic. Maybe now you're thinking about going back to zoology again, you know? Who knows?
well, I didn't talk about the specifics of the career, but I've been using my zoology all the way through, and forestry and everything. I think that a career in applied economics is one of the most creative careers that anybody could possibly want. My aunt has a degree in decision theory, not me. She just gave me the mentoring. But it's a wonderful.
We'll come back to your magic aunt. Yeah, I think a lot of people will have that question about your magic aunt Sue right there.
Yeah.
That's a story right there.
Oh yeah.
Shadi, are you ready? It's your turn.
I'm ready. It's been so nice to see points in common. I always get excited when I know that a senior economist in the profession started with an undergraduate that is not in economics. So like Rudy, I came to the US from abroad, but not as an international student in that case. So I come from Lebanon. And I don't know if you know, Lebanon is a very small country in the Mediterranean with a lot of history and political troubles. But despite that, between the time I was growing up and the time I studied, there was a relatively calm period where I enjoyed studying agricultural sciences. So it's an agricultural engineering degree, very similar to what Kim said. It has everything. Zoology was just one part of it. It has plant science, animal science, environmental science, socioeconomic sciences. 5 years with a thesis at the end where I was interested in biodiversity conservation. So I worked on 2 species, Mediterranean lily flower and cedar iris flower, where we worked on how could you conserve the species in the threat of touristic pressure both on beaches and mountains. Like Kim said, there was a lot of breadth, but a little bit less depth. And so I had a hidden dream of going to the US, but I was uncomfortable because Lebanon was not an American colony, like Rudy said about the Philippines. It was a French mandate. And so I was uncomfortable with the transitions across languages. I thought maybe going to the American University of Beirut is a good intermediate step. So I took the opportunity of a plant science master's degree there, where I worked on domesticating the local species of oregano to protect it from over-harvesting. And at the end of that, I was under the impression that the world needed more people who did things rather than said things. And so I was more interested in transferring the knowledge to those who needed it, as opposed to producing more knowledge. And so I took jobs with international NGOs working in South Lebanon, an Italian NGO called ICU, and then Mercy Corps, which is an American NGO. And I worked on improving the olive oil sector in South Lebanon and sustainable forest management of pine. And then from there, I got the most unexpected transition to working for the International Programs Office of UC Davis, where they were doing similar work, but they were bringing extension agents and farmers to campus to show them the US model of extension. Like how does it work in the US to transfer the knowledge from the university to those who need it. And I, like Kim said, I also took advantage of being staff there, and I took many courses thinking, what do I want to do after this? I thought I would do a PhD in post-harvest physiology, but I took a course in economics of small-scale agriculture in developing countries, and I loved what that could do to the work that I was doing in extension that did not take into account economic factors. And so I did the master's in ag econ there. I went to Cornell for my PhD, took my first job at Purdue University, and then for family reasons, I moved back east. So I was also in the natural resource department at the University of New Hampshire, which is where I did most of my career. I got tenure and recently moved to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which was my first experience in an ag econ department. So this is my journey across states and countries and departments. But at the same time, there was a journey across disciplines, and that journey across disciplines was born from my lack of comfort in extension work that we did in the national setting, giving advice, say, on integrated pest management that did not take into account economic factors. We didn't think about externalities and incentives and substitution effects. And so I thought that economics would be great. But then when I looked at ag econ, there was very little agricultural science and agricultural economics. And then I was a little bit disappointed, but then I thought, but what if this is what I could do? What if I brought more biology, biological dynamics and ecology into economics, and then brought back some economics to the agricultural sciences, and I used these to inform decision making. And this is what I did. This was everything that I've been doing since then. I was lucky to find an advisor who took that on, because some of the mentoring advice that I had initially was, this is a waste of time. You cannot do all of this. We don't need biology and economics. We could do it without it. But then I found this amazing advisor who said, this is exactly what I need for my research program. I work with many people from different disciplines, and you could bring that knowledge, and that would be super useful. And so I still enjoy being a kind of an ambassador of disciplines. And I also enjoy the discomfort it gives me in the sense that it keeps you on your toes intellectually, talking to different sciences and bringing the point of view of the other and being uncomfortable. I find that very healthy. But I also found it to bring amazing research ideas. All of the research ideas in my dissertation and after that were born from an extension request that came initially to my advisor. And then I took all the opportunities he gave me to go and present to industry groups and to different disciplinary scientific conferences, where a lot of the questions that I could not answer at the moment became research questions for my dissertation. So for example, a wine manager in a famous winery in Napa stood up and asked, what would I do if my neighbor does not control for that disease? What should I still do what you're saying? And I said, I haven't figured it out. But then I took that and developed a spatial dynamic model of externalities and put it in an applied game theoretic framework. And then I got the answer. And so interdisciplinary work could help bringing innovation into our discipline and taking it back, as opposed to some of the advice that I had received initially. And another research idea came from attending cocktails when people come from policy settings to grad school. And I was telling that minister, he's an ag minister in his country, and I said what I did, and he said, oh, that model would be great for the this pest that we have in coffee systems and in shade grown. Why don't you, have you thought about doing that? And I said, no. I wrote down what the name of that pest was, and I went and I worked on it, and it was one of the most interesting projects. And so the highlights that I had along the way, surprisingly, were not the peer-reviewed publications. I always felt like when a paper gets accepted, it was an anticlimactic moment, but it was when I heard from somebody by email or otherwise about somebody who used that, what this paper did. So for instance, getting an email from an extension colleague saying, hey, we just found out that farmers are looking at that threshold infection rate beyond which they did what you had recommended in this work. Or for instance, receiving a seminar invitation to say from somebody I didn't know, saying, could you come and tell us how interdisciplinary collaboration could lead to bioeconomic models for sustainable agriculture? Or receiving an email from somebody who had written a grant and saying, we were told that we needed a bioeconomic model in this grant, and we looked it up, we looked at the literature, and we found your paper. Would you be interested? And I thought that was amazing because this is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to produce the information both to those who needed to implement it in terms of growers, but also other sciences. And also the third highlight was when that work or that impact crossed boundaries, geographic boundaries, getting an email from somebody who was doing sabbatical in the US and had attended a seminar and then said, would you be willing to come and give us a keynote on how we could use environmental and resource economics for biodiversity conservation in the tropical Andes? And you would think they would know how to do that. Environmental economists had been doing that for a long time, but we had not crossed many disciplinary bridges. And so that was also another opportunity, and it was exciting because then I went from collaborating with entomologists and plant pathologists and ecologists to now I'm learning from physicists and ethnobotanists and anthropologists. And I think that helped along the way. Grad school for a international student is not the easiest thing, but what helped was having worked before doing the PhD. So a lot of the stress that was going on with my classmates, I didn't necessarily feel it because the PhD was no different from some of the other tasks that I had to complete. And a lot of it was because of my committee, my advisor, they were supportive of what I was doing. And another unexpected thing you would think that was super helpful was staying in touch with family, especially if you're from another country, staying in touch with family and friends, especially those who have never heard of a tenure track system and they couldn't care less of what it means. And friends who are in other jobs where once you explain it to them, you say, yeah, that's exactly what we do in probation. It's just that your probation takes more time and it's a time to evaluate your work. And that was a relief. Like the fact that in my network, nobody had done a PhD was a relief because I treated the PhD and then later on the tenure track time in many ways similar to what would happen in another job. Of course, we have different types of stressors, but so do other industries, and that's how I thought about it. And lastly, it's the flexibility. I did not want to be a professor in the first place. I wanted to work for international organizations, but then things happened along the way and I found new passions and I listened to what made others passionate. And the rest of the story, I already said it. It was not part of the plan, but I loved the way it happened and I wouldn't change anything about it. And thank you for the opportunity to listen to your stories and to tell mine.
Thank you, Shadi. Now, you storytellers, you forgot to tell people your current position. So we'll start with Shadi. Shadi, you are a brand new assistant professor, am I correct?
Yes, my family and I moved in the middle of a pandemic in an RV from Boston to Illinois. So I haven't met any of my colleagues yet, except for Zoom.
Yeah, so you're brand new at your work location.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, August.
And in the beginning of the career. And then we have some old bees. Let's see, who has the most senior tenure? Would that be Rudy?
Yeah, probably. But maybe not the oldest.
No,
though.
no, I'm not saying age. No,
Rudy, what was your degree year? Your PhD?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, what year was it?
Oh, 92?
Yeah, I think we were about the same. I think we were about the same time. So I wonder, but go ahead.
I'm 91. Sorry, but that's okay. We're all.
Oh, your Kimmy you're 91, and the Don is what, 92 too?
I'm 94.
So we have some. You're 94. Yeah, because I'm 96, and I remember I met you when we were both in grad school, and I was following you actually during the AAEA meeting. So boy, now we all know how old we are. But that's not the point. The point is we're listening to the diverse voices of AAEA, and this is a showcase of a diversity. So let's get some questions going. All right, we got some comments in the chat box, which is great. But let's get some question interaction going. I will start. Well, Rudy, you were talking about publication, get the papers out of the door. I did receive a question from several junior colleagues who could not be in our event today, and they want me to ask all of you this question, maybe more senior ones better than the junior one. I mean, that's up to you. The question is, several junior colleagues got stuck in the paper submission process, not because they didn't finish it. It's because they're senior co-authors, which could be their thesis advisor or other senior authors. They were holding on the paper. So it's a kind of an awkward situation, but as junior colleagues wanted to go get it out as quickly as possible. But some of the senior authors, whether they were busy or they delayed the process or they just did not respond, it became an awkward situation to follow up. What would be your advice to these junior colleagues?
You want me to go first, Kathleen?
Sure, Rudy. Yeah, you're the one mentioned it, get a paper out. But then we got people who want to get a paper out and they couldn't get the paper out. So how would you help them?
I would think, I think you just need to really nudge your senior author as often as you could, gently nudging them, right? Because I agree that, different people work in different ways, but especially if you make it clear to them that you really need this paper published, right? But they should know that, right? If you're the senior author and you're working with junior members of the profession, you should really be cognizant of that fact that it's very important for our junior colleagues to publish their papers as soon as they can, because it can really help them in their in the job market and also in their career. So that's my advice anyway. Gentle nudging, but often.
So this is Kim, and I would actually say not gentle. I would say aggressive.
Oh, aggressive.
So, no, I honestly, I've been part of large research teams and interdisciplinary teams. We've started out with charters, and in the charter, everyone agrees. Everyone's in the charter, the senior and the most junior people, that the priority is for efficiency and speed for the junior faculty members. And in that charter, so I agree, the importance of these papers getting out is more important for the junior faculty than it is for the senior or the postdocs or the grad students. The second point is that if you look on my CV, a lot of my students I wrote with, they're senior authors or postdocs or younger collaborators. Just because someone's more senior doesn't mean they should be the senior author. Who did the work? Who did the majority of the work? Who needs that publication out? And if you are junior, but you're taking control, you're pushing this forward, ask the other co-authors, say, I've done all of this, I can give you until this date. What more do you think needs to be done on this? I mean, just push them, be really tough. And I don't know if, my advisor wasn't a co-author on my dissertation paper. I did so much of it on my own, and he just felt like he couldn't do it. Not that he couldn't, but it would have taken him so long. And he said, don't put my name on it. Just move ahead, do what you need to do. And, I needed to get this stuff out. I know that it sounds like maybe I sound more aggressive than I should be, because if you know me by person, I don't come across as an aggressive person. But this is really important that our junior colleagues be put number one. I mean, we all have that responsibility. I'm not giving this advice to our junior people. I'm giving this to our senior people.
I agree.
On.
I agree with you, Kim. And I think you do have to be assertive. I think it goes as far as putting dates of, if I haven't heard back from you, I feel like I can put this in by myself. And then you have a paper trail showing that you gave them an option. And I do think it's senior faculty. We started mentoring committees here at CSU, 15 years ago. And I think you even can make your mentoring committees the bad guys. Say, well, I went to my mentoring committee and they said to do this. Then they can come and be mad at us, their colleagues, for putting that bug in your ear. Because I know some of this really is a hard balancing act to feel like you can't be too assertive because of the power dynamic. So go to someone who's on the right side of the power dynamic and use them as your asset. I mean, and that's what we're there for.
Yep. And you know what? If you're a small, squeaky female anyway, they're all gonna think you're assertive, overly assertive. So just do it, own it, be it. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop.
Dr. Kimberly Rollins is a department chair in UConn. So when you apply for that position, just be careful. She's a department chair. That's all I'm gonna say. All right. Now, let's see. Any question in the chat box? Not yet. I have another question for you. Again, this is coming from a group of people who cannot participate today. And I appreciate, I think somebody, it was Kim, I guess, you mentioned about the gender issue and some of the inequality situation that facing our profession. It's actually pretty general across a different STEM, especially the STEM professions. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how would you think we can make a difference? Just keep it simple. Now, we can debate this for a couple of days, all right? Well, we only have a few more minutes. So give us a few thoughts about how you think we could make a difference. Who would like to start? Shadi, you didn't talk last time, so we'll start with you. How do you feel about that we could do together to help the situation across gender, across age, across nationality to make it a more balanced profession for ourselves? Any thoughts?
I don't know. We talk about that all the time. One, I think having a place at the table, I think is the theme. I hear sometimes colleagues saying, "Oh, but how can we be more open and diverse if we looked for that diversity, we didn't find it?" Then it becomes of what precedes that step that would have produced that flow of people that you're looking for in order to have a more diverse workplace. And in that conversation, what I was suggesting was starting in the earlier steps, right? And so we were discussing, for instance, how we could invite undergraduate students from underrepresented groups to be part of a workshop, for instance, so that there could be some kind of a job shadowing way, really, but that could lead to mentorship, so that we have more of these people represented in the profession. And then once they are represented, then that would have solved the issue in the first place, that sometimes we hear that there isn't enough of certain types of people, whatever that representation is.
That's a great insight. Anybody else would like to say a few words before we move on to other questions? I do see other questions in the chat box, so I'd like to bring that out. Rudy, were you going to say something?
So, was the question about how we can promote more gender equity and racial equity?
Yes.
Yeah, I think those are really very important issues we have. It's not just for our profession, but other fields as well. And that's something that we've been very cognizant about in the AAEA board, as Don will probably can tell you more. So I think there's also a number of issues that's been discussed right now related to how we treat minorities and our female junior colleagues when we're presenting seminars, for example. So I think we have to be cognizant of these issues on how, we need to make sure that everyone will feel, everyone feels welcome in our profession. So I think that's something that we've discussed. Mentoring is also very important, obviously. So we have these mentoring sessions now in our profession, but also mentoring within the departments, right, where the grad students is also important. Mentoring for junior faculty is also very important. I know that in many departments now, assistant professors have their own mentoring teams or committees, right? You don't want to wait midterm before you mentor them. You want to mentor them when they start, right? as an assistant professor in the department.
Thank you.
Kim
I
just keeps
saw-
giving.
Yeah, Don, go ahead.
Kim just keeps giving pearls of wisdom. So I'll just back her up and say, yeah, some of us again that are senior call people when we don't see balance. And I don't think, I want to believe it is not bad intentions and it's bad habits, but I can't even tell you how many times even groups have been proposed to me this year in panels where I've had to say, I've had to be the fact checker and saying, where's the diversity here? And I know what names always pop to the forefront when you think about putting a panel on this topic or that topic together. But I'm the one here telling you people are watching, and you can't tell me that if you don't think a little bit deeper, there's not a more diverse set of people who could talk about that and talk about it in a more rich and nuanced way. So I think that's again, not a job for everyone on the call, but for us senior faculty. And I would also say, yeah, the article that was out this week about, you know, actually enumerating and evaluating the environment that seminars are giving to women and diverse scholars relative to less diverse scholars is something we all need to think about. And again, we may not even be noticing it because it is so normal to us now. But, you know, again, wherever you can, be the voice in those seminars, tempering that. And if you're comfortable, and if you're not comfortable, talk to senior scholars you trust in your organization or your department or the association if it's something that's happening at our meetings, and get us aware of it and doing what we can to temper it, because I want to believe these are not all malintended and that they're just bad habits we fell into, but it does happen. And it used to be something we giggled about or just said, oh, can you believe it? We're beyond that. I think now we need to just work on making it just better. So make us do some of the work for you if we need to, now that we navigated some of this. And Rudy, I was so glad to hear when you started your story of, in my first seminar, usually there's a ... and a horror story. And I was so glad to hear you say, it was so friendly, it was so wonderful, and it was so warm and welcoming. And I've certainly been in those sessions, but I've also been in the ones where that's not what the punchline is. And it's certainly gotten better over time, at least in the circles I run in, but we need to make sure it stays on the improvement track. So, you know, I know we can't fix it all, but I think there's at least an awareness, and that is the start to resolving.
And I think if we see bad behavior in seminars or other things, we don't want to be quiet about those things, right?
Thank you. I think things did change over 20, 30 years, you know, when we were students versus where we are today. My first conference presentation was when I was a master's student, 23 years old. First time using the whole English presenting my thesis in front of a Caucasian white male group in the Soil and the Water Society conference. And at that time we were using the, you know, the transparency kind of thing. It's not even slide, it's a transparency machine. I don't even know, for younger generation, Shadi, you probably had never even seen a transparency stuff. But we had to draw pictures using the transparency. And then I got a whole box of the transparency package with my luggage. And then when I was in a hurry to rush to the conference room, I dropped all of them. And I lost every single order that I couldn't even follow what the heck was going on. So I grabbed this massive package of the transparency package with me. And then I look at my thesis advisor, Dr. Steve Lovejoy. He was sitting in the back of the room. And then he just looked at me. I probably turned blue. And he said, you're going to be fine. Just go ahead. Forget about the transparency. Tell them the story. I said, okay. So I went up there, talked about 5 minutes. I had no clue, totally blocked out. And then he stood up and applauded for so long. I said, was I really that good? So after the conference, I asked him, he said, yeah, you were great. After all these years, I asked him after I became a full professor, I said, Dr. Lovejoy, do you still remember that first presentation? He said, sure, I remember you. You dropped all the transparency. I said, was I really that good? Because you were standing applauding. He said, Kathleen, we had no idea what you were talking about, but you were so good at handling the situation. You deserve a standing ovation. So I said, oh, now you're telling me the truth. But because of him, I am who I am today. Just because that moment with his recognition, the whole room of people just shared that passion as a professor supporting students. I think I will never forget that moment. It was just heartwarming. So when I heard all of your stories, I could agree with all of you. Now come back to our question. We have some really good questions here. One person asked about sharing the output. I saw some exchange using Twitter, using short commentary, paper stuff. Would you guys just vocalize so all of the people could hear you? This is a junior colleague asking about promoting their work since nobody reads journal, peer review, copy paper anymore. And any short, sweet advice?
Yeah, well, I'm just impressed because this is where the junior folks are ahead of us, senior folks. And now I made it a goal because I've been teased about not being a Twitter person, that over the pandemic I've learned to tweet. Not always good, but I tweet. And I'm so impressed with so many of the junior scholars, both students coming out on the job market paper and juniors who are grabbing, either the perfect figure or table or 3 key points from their paper, posting it on Twitter and driving traffic to their work, whether it's a paper, a presentation, a webinar they did, if they have like a YouTube they can drive them to. Do not be shy about doing that because even for those who won't go to the full paper but are watching the ecosystem, your name's going to start implanting on them as someone who works in that area. So when we even get a recommendation for a seminar speaker or someone of our colleagues who does work in an area, we have that in the back of our heads. And where possible, go ahead and tag AAEA, and we'll do our best to like retweet it and get more attention to it even beyond your circle. So that's one thing I've seen people, and perhaps it's happening in Instagram and Facebook, but I think mostly where it's happening is in the Twitter world. That's actually one place I've seen a really big change over the last 18 months or so.
No, I agree with Don.
Oh, so yeah, go ahead, Rudy.
I agree with Don about the use of Twitter. I actually just joined Twitter last month. But I was a little skeptical at first, but I really enjoy it now, the interactions, especially with the junior folks. So one example I can give you is Francis Thibault from Kansas State, who's in the job market now. And I think the department, the Ag Econ department at Kansas State has really done a good job, and his advisor, of promoting him, that he is in the job market and also explaining his job market paper. I'm sure you saw that one, Don, right? So for those of you on Twitter, you might want to check that one, because that's a good example of how you can market someone, I think, in the job market.
As we all know, the Economic Research Service has been hiring like crazy, and sometimes from circles we all don't currently run in. So they've been, I think, trying to uplift their young scholars as well. Like probably last week I saw a lot of the traffic because the Ag Outlook Forum was at the national level and ERS had constant sessions going. So they did a really good job of lifting up some reports that are finally coming back out of ERS because they've hired up a little bit too. So, I just think that feels like it's the new state of the world. And yeah, I guess the senior scholars could also think about how we could institutionalize that in our agencies, organizations, and departments. So it's not always even on the young faculty's shoulders, but that it's something our organizations highlight.
Cool. Sometimes the institution departments, more advanced departments have little cohorts helping each other to promote. You write up a little stuff. Our college has a pretty good communication service that if we want to promote something, we should write about 50 words and they help us to get it out a different way. So check with your department. You know, sometimes the department offers that kind of a support to students, junior colleagues, senior colleagues, whatever. There's another question about using editing service. I see some discussion about editing for people who are not English, using English as a primary language. So we often have international scholars, especially international students, who run into such challenges. Do you all, the storytellers here, do you all have some kind of support for these students in your institution? Do you know that?
I don't know about other places, but I know in everywhere I've taught at and where I went to get my education, that the English departments had services for undergraduates and graduates for professional writing. It didn't cost anything. I'm sure that they, of course, the people, the tutors were being paid. So for example, I've asked all my grad students to get signed up, be assigned with a professional writing helper. I don't know if that's true for every university though, but it's possible that you have those at your university, but you're not aware of it. But I know it's been very useful for the people that I've worked with to have those services.
Kathleen, I'm looking now for the name of one such service that I can recommend offline, so I'm not advertising for companies.
Because you were the one.
Yeah. So I haven't used it myself. I've had, but I know colleagues, international students who became faculty that do use these professional services. The kind of service that Kim is mentioning is great. I use it for my graduate students, international graduate students, but it's usually not enough for submission, depending on the kind of the level of English. But there are some good, a little bit expensive, but it's worth it. Professional editing services, academic. And I'm looking now for the name of the company to send it to Grace.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
I heard from several institutions that they have a writing center within the university or department of the college. I know some schools offer that service, but they use English department students or professional communication science students to serve as a tutor, similar to what Kim mentioned. My dean, who is very kind, if I go negotiate with my dean, I say, I'll pay a little bit. Would you help us to find a good editor? He would, but that's a good dean. So I don't know if all the deans will do that kind of stuff, but I do pay. When I put the grants together, I put some costs in there to cover editing, revision, to help us to create reports and journal peer reviewed articles, that sort of thing. So I cover with my grants.
Well,
and I saw people have a, Don, go ahead.
I just think that's a challenging thing for young professionals, because if they are fortunate to get grants, that's not kind of where we probably want them to pay. But I think it's been very lightly framed so far, and perhaps we need to go back to Mark Bellemere, because now I saw another member posted on Twitter the same idea this week. But we had talked about within our publications committee for a very select number of young scholars, particularly maybe from smaller departments or from international backgrounds, actually making that some kind of service we could even offer through the journals. Is if something comes in with really apparently strong science, but with a narrative that could use polishing, is that something we as an association, or particularly someone's first placement in our publications, we could provide some support in that regard as well. And Mark has brought it up for 2 years. And then of course, COVID happened, so we got distracted by other things, but perhaps that's something we could take back and have him flesh out. He was actually presenting it to our publisher, Wiley, about if it was something they would even help cost share, because if you think about it, their technical editors are the ones who really sometimes have the frustration of if it never got exactly polished the way it should. So let us take that question, and if people want to give a thumbs up or a good idea in the chat box about whether that's something they could see using, in addition to these great pieces of advice, and if the departments are willing to do it. I think we all know there's very different resource levels across departments and who might say yes or no. And again, I don't want people spending their first grant they secures money on editing a manuscript. That's not the highest and best use. So, okay, that sounds great. It sounds like there's some support there. So we'll give Mark some clearance to maybe write something up.
I think it's a fantastic idea, Don. I think that's an investment well made within our profession to help people to get publications, especially the junior emerging scholars, grad student, postdocs, those kind of people who don't have the grant support to pay for the editing, polishing. I thank you so much for being our president. We're so honored to have you as our president. That's fantastic. Leave your gene with the AAEA. We will clone you, and then we will clone the next president just like you. I think that will be forever served. Well, I know it's Mark's idea, but you brought it up, so kudos to you and Mark. All right, somebody had this Twitter discussion over here. I don't know. Young people like to tweet. I don't even know what Twitter is. I see this little sign from time to time. Never paid attention until our former president started using it. So any other thoughts about Twitter or any other questions before we close for our discussion today? Before you all leave, we are recruiting our next round of storytellers. Next round of a storyteller will be in 2 months. We do this every other month. Last time we did this one was, the first one was in December. This is in February. So we will somewhere around April, May, maybe after the end of the semester, give everybody some fun things to do. So if you're interested to be our storyteller next time, please leave your name and your email address in the chat box, and then we will follow up with you. It doesn't matter your position, your current situation, student, staff, faculty, technician, postdoc, anybody who would like to share your story. You don't even need to have a title or whatever. Just come join us and then leave your name and then leave your email address in the chat box for us. Then we will be in touch with you. Hey, Diogo volunteered. That's a fantastic. Diogo, yeah. Now Diogo is from UK though. So if he can make it this time, then we will come for this time. We're gonna remember for that. So anybody else besides Diogo? We need about 4 or 5. So if you can think of somebody, or you can nominate somebody. Why don't you nominate somebody? And then put Dawn pointed out, there's a Hernan. That's a good thing about Dawn. She knows everybody in here. So if Dawn or anybody you want to volunteer or nominate your mentor, your friends, who you believe will be a good storyteller and share their story with us, please nominate those individuals too. And then we will definitely check in with your permission and with their permission. Okay. Now, Dave Zimmerman already told the story, Diogo. You missed it. Look at our blog and the recording. So that's yeah, we saw the story of Ansu too. That's a fantastic. Any other thoughts or final thoughts? You can, please unmute yourself. We don't have to talk to the storyteller this way, but why don't you just unmute yourself if you like to share something or anything you'd like to share? Diogo, you cannot share your story right now. You're reserved for the next round, all right? But before we check off, anybody else? Any question, comments? Jessica.
I would
yes,
just tell
go ahead, Don.
I would just tell everybody, read the newsletter if you didn't this week. The Graduate Student Association has been just super active this year, and there's 2 new opportunities for young scholars, depending on how young you are. One is that we're now going to have graduate student liaisons with an increasing number of the sections. So if you're interested in that, self-nominate. And then they asked us if we would host some virtual job market paper sessions. Not the annual meetings will probably be hybrid as well, but we hope to at least be partially in person, but they'll be in late spring, early summer job market papers by topic that we will host through AEA for people who want the practice of presenting to an audience and getting feedback. So if you are in that space of looking at the job market, please do not be shy about putting your name in as someone who might want to be involved in those, and watch for more information over the next month or 2.
Michael nominates Jason Lusk. That's a fantastic idea. Jason doesn't like to talk a whole lot, but we'll put it down up front to invite him. Maybe he will agree. Cool. All right. Well, with that thoughts, if you don't have any other questions or comments, and please be in touch with us. You can find all of us on AAEA website. Thank you so much for all the storytellers. You guys are all fantastic. Your stories brought tears to my eyes and brought me back to good old memories. So thank you so much for your generous time and your effort to support our profession. Thanks to all the listeners, and thanks everybody interacting in the chat box, which is fantastic. We look forward to seeing you in the near future. Y'all have a great evening. Bye-bye.